Melusine by Lynne Chapter 1, The Journey. Roger sat between his twin sisters in the back of the family car and stared across each of their necks in turn at the countryside flashing by. The twins were grizzling and sniping at each other without cease. They had been ever since they'd left Paris that morning. They'd liked Paris. They'd have been quite happy to stay there for the whole holiday. They'd gone mad about the little street cafes with their citrons presses. They'd gawked at the passers-by and giggled and pointed till their mother lost patience. The twins had been furious when their parents had said there wasn't time to go up the Eiffel Tower if they were going to make it to the chateau by nightfall. And they'd been griping ever since, making Roger's life a misery. What a huge country France was, thought Roger, as they drove mile after mile and hour after hour. He was getting sick of being squashed between these two boring girls. Would they never shut up and let him look through the window in peace? "Can't I sit on the outside?" he begged several times, when he could get a word in. "I'm sorry, darling," his mother said from the passenger seat. "You must sit between the girls and keep them apart. If they start hitting each other, Dad'll go mad." Roger sighed heavily and wriggled back a bit, so that he was slightly behind them and not right between. They were leaning forward to squabble across him. He was able to look at the near side window behind Emma's neck. Almost an unobstructed view for once. The fields of sweet corn swept past like an army with lances, alternating with smiling yellow acres of big-faced sunflowers. The only break in the pleasant monotony was an occasional village or isolated farmhouse. Suddenly Roger sat up straight and turned, wrenching his neck. He twisted and scrambled so he could kneel up and look behind through the rear window. "Oh, sit still, can't you?" peeved Polly. "Keep your dirty shoes off my skirt. Oh, Mummy's kicking!" "Sit around properly, Roger," ordered their father. He was getting tired. "We'll be there in half an hour." Roger faced forward reluctantly. He was frowning. Had he really seen what he thought he'd seen? After a few minutes, he saw it again. "Look!" He pointed, but by the time the others had turned their heads, they'd gone past. "What?" the twins asked. "A huge question mark. What are you on about?" "I saw a big question mark on the barn we passed. I saw one just now as well. It was like painted on, huge." "You're round the twist," said Polly contemptuously. "Did you see it, Dad? I've got to watch the road, and it's damn well putting me to sleep," said his father. "Let me drive a bit," said their mother. The twins groaned loudly. It was their contention that their kind, gentle mother turned into a maniac as soon as she got behind the wheel. Their father, who privately agreed with them, sat up hastily and opened the window. "We're nearly there now," he said briskly, sounding very awake. They weren't. By the time they actually arrived, it was pitch dark, but before that, Roger had seen two more of the question marks. He didn't say any more about them, but gazed at them until the car had left them behind. They filled the whole end wall of buildings. He had no idea what they were there for. They gave him a funny feeling, as if there were a question mark over the whole area they were going to, or over the holiday. The chateau stood up against the stars, a great spooky shape with a wide, round tower at one end that stuck up above the straight line of roof. The car bumped over long grass and ruts. There was no road and no lights at all except the car headlights. It was a wonder they'd managed to find it, and Emma sounded as if she wished they hadn't when she said, "Ugh, what a horrible black-looking place." Polly was asleep. They got out stiffly. There was a strong animal smell in the air, and the lonely sound of frogs and crickets. Their father took a torch and played it over the building. "We must have missed the drive somehow," he muttered. "This seems to be the back. What a weird place. It looks deserted." "It's very overgrown," said their mother, "and ramshackle. Look at those shutters. They're half hanging off." "I do think they might have left a light on," said their father. "I mean, they do know we're coming, don't they?" Emma had shaken Polly awake. She stumbled out of the car and at once gave a little shriek. "Ugh! I think I've trodden in some cow muck." Their mother had located a door and was now banging on it. "Hello!" she called in her very English voice. "Nous sommes arrivés!" After a few minutes, they heard noises, and then the door creaked open. A man of about 40, with a thin, grizzled face and roughed clothes, appeared in the torch's beam. He had a torch of his own and shone it back at them, first on one and then on the other, till he'd seen them all. There was an awkward pause. Then he said gruffly, "Bonjour, entrez." They stood aside to let them in. They walked in single file into a dimly lit stone-walled corridor and huddled there until the man had bolted the door after them and gone ahead into a room at the end. They followed him, the girls nudging and stifling nervous giggles, while their mother hissed, "Behave yourselves now." The room they found themselves in was a huge, cavernous, incredibly old-fashioned kitchen. It reminded Roger of one in Jack and the Beanstalk, presided over by the ogre. It was lit by a single oil lamp and the glowing remains of a fire. The fireplace was almost as big as a small room. Huge logs had been burning now, only their ends were left, with a few smoldering embers between them. In front of this was a very long, narrow table, covered with oilcloth, over which the lamp was hanging. There were a great many things on the table, including pots, pans, plates, a wine bottle, newspapers, tools, and all sorts of rubbish. It looked as if the man had been eating his dinner out of a huge old iron frying pan with a long handle. There was a chunk of French bread sticking out of a mess of fried egg. As Roger, who was extremely hungry, edged irresistibly closer to the food, something happened to the table. There had been black patches on the oilcloth, which he had taken for stains, but as he came closer, the patches suddenly came alive, moved as one, and rose up with a sudden buzzing. Roger's mother let out a gasp. "They're flies," she whispered. "Avez-vous faim?" the man asked shortly. In halting French, Roger's father said that perhaps some bread and butter for the children. Soon they were all seated at the fly-covered table, trying to keep their elbows and hands out of the patches of grease and the puddles of wine, while the Frenchman hacked lengths of long loaf and pushed blackened knives and a packet of well-excavated butter toward them. He then filled 3 glasses with wine for the children. "Ugh, I'm not drinking this," muttered Emma, but Roger tossed his down without even tasting it. He was so thirsty. And 2 small glasses of some other drink for their parents. Roger's father drank some and choked. "Wow!" he exclaimed. "C'est très fort, car très bon." He held out his glass for more. "Vous demeurez ici seul?" asked his mother politely. "J'ai une petite fille," the man grunted. "You have only one daughter?" asked Roger's mother, rather waggishly due to nervousness. The man looked blank. Vous avez seulement un enfant?" She held up one finger. The man said in an angry voice, "J'en ai 2. La 3 filles ne restait pas chez moi." Roger thought what a bad-tempered man he seemed, and wondered why he advertised for guests if every simple question annoyed him. He'd had 2 daughters, it seemed, yet only one was still around. Still, a daughter would be useful, if the right age to keep the twins off his back. Pity the other one didn't live there anymore. Roger's father stood up. "I think it's time we got to bed. Could we see our part of the..." "If our part is anything like this," Emma whispered to Polly, "I'll die." She hadn't eaten a thing, and had sat well back from the table with a look of disgust on her face. Roger, while not relishing the flies or the wine puddles, thought the huge old kitchen was exciting, especially the great fireplace and all the shadowy nooks and crannies in the stone walls. It really was like something out of a book, and he looked forward to seeing it by daylight and exploring the rest of the chateau as well. Meanwhile, the owner, whose name was Monsieur Sarpe, led the way to a door in a far dark corner. He fitted a large iron key like a jailer's into an enormous square lock and turned it with a grinding noise. Then he switched on a light on the other side. The girls, cowering under their father's arm, gasped in amazement. The difference was incredible. The contrast between the gloomy, grimy kitchen behind them and this, even their mother could not restrain a little murmur of delighted relief. A large, beautifully furnished room opened out before them. The switch had illuminated an elegant, light-fitting that looked like a brass octopus with a pointed bulb in each tentacle. The walls were hung with paintings and tapestries, except one, which was lined with beautiful old books. The chairs were covered with brocade, and there was an 8-sided table in the middle that looked like something in a museum. It was inlaid with colored stone in a magnificent polished pattern. The others seemed absolutely enchanted with this, and ran about touching things and examining in wonder at the grandeur of it all, and exclaiming in wonder at the grandeur of it all. Roger, for his part, felt rather daunted. It wasn't the sort of room he could ever be comfortable in. He'd worried the whole time that he might damage something. He'd be worried the whole time he might damage something. But there must be other rooms. He found a door and went through it. On the other side was another superb room with a double bed in it. Not a four-poster, but still very grand. Beyond that was another bedroom. This one had 2 little beds, each on a raised tiled platform with steps leading up and a wrought iron railing around them, as if each bed stood on its own little balcony. The rest of the room was on a lower level, a sunken floor covered with a gorgeous thick red and blue rug. Roger sighed. He knew who would sleep here, and it wouldn't be him. His room, which he found leading off the kitchen, was the smallest in the place. It looked as if it had once been a walk-in larder. He groped for the light switch to inspect it, and as he did so, he froze. There was someone else in the room. Someone or something. His eye had been caught by a brief movement on the floor near the bed. The only light, which came from behind him, stretched its rectangle across the floor, stopping just short of the bed, which could hardly be seen. But something had flickered or shifted somehow just near the bed leg. Was some intruder hiding there? Roger's hand on the switch unfroze, but he didn't turn the light on. What had that police officer said when he'd visited the school? Never tackle a burglar. He might go for you. Leave his exit clear. At the time, Roger had thought that was idiotic. What, let a thief escape? But he suddenly understood. He turned and ran back into the first big room. Mom, Dad, I think there's someone under my bed. Every face in the room turned to him. He had time to notice Monsieur Serpais especially. It had gone deathly white beneath the short grizzled hair and stubby beard, while the others were pelting Roger with questions and his father was brushing past him to go and investigate. Monsieur Serpais seemed to vanish. He just melted backwards through the connecting door into his own dismal abode, and Roger heard the big key turn. The twins, were for once giving Roger all their attention. Did you actually see him? Where? What did he look like? Before he could draw breath to answer, though, his father called and they all trooped through. The light was now on in the cupboard bedroom off the kitchen. It was not only the smallest, but certainly the plainest room in the apartment, with nothing grand or interesting about it at all. It really was like a larder, or perhaps a monk's cell, with a low ceiling and whitewashed walls and a flagstone floor. No rug, let alone a gorgeous one. The bed was like an army cot. There wasn't even a proper window, just a tiny dark hole with rusty netting stretched over it. Shelves, a straight chair, that was all, and absolutely no intruder to be seen. Of course, they all laughed at him, except his mother, who was exploring the kitchen. Trust old Rog to dream up a burglar. It must have been that wine he was swigging. I'm not so sure it was a person, Roger said defiantly. I just saw something move. It might have been a rat. The girls burst into mock shrieks. His father went out of the room, which was crowded with the 4 of them in it, giving him a friendly cuff on the behind. Go to bed, the lot of you, called their mother. The holiday starts tomorrow. And that is the end of chapter 1.